I talk a lot about how well or poorly superheroes are adapted from the comics to the movies. In my opinion, adapting a character well is one of the best ways to ensure that the character will be successful. If you're going to adapt a character from the source material in the first place, it's because something about them was popular, and changing them too much can oftentimes lose whatever that was. Well, I've come up with a foolproof system of rating how well superheroes have been adapted from comics to other media. The 3 C's: costume, character, and continuity. Costume rates their outfits, their overall look, and their superficial physical characteristics. Character rates their personality, relationships with others, and their powers. And continuity rates their origin stories, their iconic moments, and their overall place in the world, universe, or timeline. After using this very scientific system on every Marvel hero who has been featured in the MCU, I've officially and inarguably ranked which superheroes rank the absolute lowest on the adaptational accuracy scale. Are these characters who've been popular in the MCU, or are they ones who've just sucked and everyone forgot about them? Let's take a look at the 20 worst adapted Marvel superheroes in the MCU and see what we find out. Now, remember, a character's ranking on this list is not a commentary on their quality as a character. It's only how well they've been adapted. There are some I really love ranked much lower than ones I absolutely hate. And speaking of adaptations I hate, at number 20 we start the countdown with Scar, son of Hulk. In the comics, Scar is a badass barbarian monster surviving on the wastelands of Sakaar after the planet was destroyed and his father left without even knowing he existed. He looks like a gamma-infused super buff Conan the Barbarian as a Hulk and uses weapons to survive. In the MCU, Scar is whatever the hell that is. Some kind of weird monk-looking guy who doesn't even talk and is introduced in the last couple seconds of She-Hulk with very little build-up and no fanfare. I doubt most people even know MCU Hulk has a son, and the story of him being born to today is not told or explained at all. Assumedly, Hulk hooked up with some concubines while he was a gladiatorial star in the MCU version of Sakaar, but we can only guess. Also, toss in that Sakaar is not even remotely similar. In the comics, it is a planet so inhospitable that the Hulk has trouble surviving it, while in the movie, it's a gladiatorial planet owned by a version of the Grandmaster. Look-wise, besides being green and muscular, he's completely different. Personality, we know very little of, but he seems a bit mellow to me. However, continuity-wise, he is Hulk's son and was born on Sakaar. So as tenuous as a tie as that is to the comics, it is something. So that is the start of the list. It's only down from here on adaptational accuracy, and there are still 19 heroes to go. So let's move on. At number 19, we have America Chavez. Unlike Scar, we actually know a bit about America. In Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, she has an America-themed jacket, is from another universe, and can make star portals. Other than that, she's a completely different character. She's portrayed as younger in the movie. Her brash attitude is replaced with a much more subdued and somewhat normal young girl personality. She's much physically weaker, and she cannot fly. Why they'd take all that cool stuff and replace it with just nothing, I don't really know. Assumedly though, since she's studying magic in Carmitage, they could give her some of her abilities through magic. Her powers are said to come from exposure to extra-dimensional energies in the comics, and that's similar to how Doctor Strange magic was explained in the movies. So, as tenuous of a link as that is, they could perhaps use that as an excuse to power her up and make her more like her comic counterpart. At number 18, we have Mantis of Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, before you hit me, I love Mantis. She's one of my favorite MCU characters, but this list is for science, so we need to be honest. As an adaptation from the comics, she's not very good. In Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Mantis works under Ego and uses her empathic abilities to help him rest, before joining the Guardians after siding with them against him. The comic version has no relation to Ego, but she does have empathic abilities among many other abilities not portrayed in the movies, like an ability to commune with plant life. In the movies, she's portrayed as an alien, while in the comics, she is a human who was given up to an alien religious sect, then later would have her memories wiped and sent back to Earth. She's a completely different character in the comics, with a continuity way too convoluted to adequately sum up here without adding at least half an hour to this video on her alone. She may or may not even have ties to the Distinguished Competition and other universes depending on who you're asking. Visually, her look is somewhat similar to her comic counterpart. She has antenna things on her head, empathic abilities, uses green in her outfit, and has association with the Guardians of the Galaxy, though in the comics she was also associated with the Avengers. So visually she's okay. She mostly just ranks lower in this list due to how many elements of her very, very bizarre character were left on the cutting room floor when bringing her to the screen and how different her personality is. However, like I said, she's one of my favorite MCU characters, and I think a straight adaptation of her would have confused and frightened the delicate, casual audiences of the MCU. So, let's move on to 17 with another Guardians character, Yandu. In the MCU, Yandu is one of the head captains of the Ravagers, a criminal organization in the modern day. In the comics, however, Yandu is actually a hero and freedom fighter in the original Guardians of the Galaxy in the 31st century. Most all of those members of the original Guardians were translated to being the Ravagers, so his alignment with them does add a few points onto his rating. However, changing the time period and moral alignment of a character are both pretty drastic changes to make. In the comics, he uses a bow and arrow, while in the movies, that's adapted as his little floating arrow thing. His only real similarities to the comics are being an alien, his arrow, his blue skin, and his red fin, though in the comics, the fin is part of his body and much, much bigger. Eventually, the comics did add a version of Yandu, who is pretty much the same as his movie counterpart, but changes made after the movies don't count for a list like this. And as a side note, I absolutely hate when they drastically change comic stuff to match the movies. It doesn't bring any new readers. All it does is alien. Sorry for that. Moving on to number 16 was Swordsman from Hawkeye. The MCU version of Swordsman shares the name Jack Dukun, a distinct mustache, and an affinity for swords. Other than that, there are virtually no similarities. In the MCU, he is just a guy who becomes engaged to Kate Bishop's mother. In the comics, he was an associate of Hawkeye's past in the circus who became a criminal and mercenary before redeeming himself by joining the Avengers. Really, they could have called him anything in the show and it wouldn't have made a difference, and he's only this high on the list because he does fight with a sword and does have that mustache. At 15, we have Night Nurse. Multiple women have taken the name Night Nurse in the comics, one of which was Christine Palmer, who appeared in Doctor Strange as a colleague and love interest of Dr. Stephen Strange. Besides both being related to the medical field and their hair colors, the two share almost nothing in common. This version is just a normal doctor in a hospital, while the comic version does often do work on superheroes. Though the original Night Nurse did share a brief relationship with Doctor Strange, so I wonder if they read about the Linda Carter version, but switched the name to Christine Palmer so they wouldn't have a character in the MCU who shared a name with, Wonder Woman. Number 14 is Black Goliath. In comics, Bill Everett is a scientist who worked with Hank Pym and takes the name Black Goliath after synthesizing his own version of Pym particles to grow in size. Though originally using them for selfish purposes, he quickly becomes a hero. In the movies, Bill Everett is still a scientist and is connected to Hank Pym. Otherwise, both versions share very little in common, from costume to looks to personality. Though, if they can give us a giant Lawrence Fishburne at some point, I'll be quite impressed. He was last seen with Ghost, so let's hope the climax of Thunderbolts is a giant Lawrence Fishburne decked out in full Black Goliath attire saving the day. If so, I will give that movie a 10 out of a 10. Number 13 brings us down to Phyla-Vell of Guardians of the Galaxy 3. This is a weird one because there's an equal amount of similarities and drastic differences in this character. In the MCU, she is a child, while in the comics, she's an adult. Both versions were created through science, though in the comics, she was created by the DNA of Mar-Vell, the first Captain Marvel, while in the movie, she was genetically engineered by the High Evolutionary with animal DNA. Both versions have energy abilities, though the comic version is far, far more powerful, which is often the case. Comic Phyla has a marking over her right eye that sometimes glows, while movie Phyla has a bright blue right eye. Despite the similarities in the two characters, their personalities and powers are quite different. But she is still just a kid right now, so it's possible for her to become more like her comic counterpart as she ages. This is a character who has the potential to not only escape the bottom 20 on this list, but jump way higher depending on how they decide to adapt her going forwards. And with Phyla, we're out of what I call the "at least I can tell who the hell that's supposed to be" section of this ranking list and enter the straight up stolen valor section, where characters are not even remotely close to their comic book source material. Let's dive right into the depths of the most poorly adapted MCU superheroes with number 12. AJCK from the Eternals. Now, truth be told, all the Eternals are pretty poorly adapted, from their powers to their personalities to their costumes to pretty much everything about them. But AJCK is the absolute lowest Eternal on this ranking. In the movies, AJCK is a woman and leader of the Eternals. In the comics, AJCK is a male and is not their leader. Though, as keeps happening, they did change him to being similar to his movie counterpart in the comics for very little reason. As if there's a lot of people who rushed out to buy an Eternals issue after watching the movie. And anyone who is already a fan of the comics is just going to be annoyed when they change it to a movie that no one even remembers was made. Besides both being Eternals and some very tenuous similarities in helmet design, the two share literally nothing in common. At 11, we shake things up with Binary from the end of the Marvels. In comics, Binary is a name taken by Carol Danvers after gaining immense cosmic power for a time. The MCU version is an alternate universe version of Monica's mother, Maria Rambeau, in a universe where she doesn't have a daughter and the X-Men exist. At this time, we know very little about this character, but we do know enough to clearly see that this is basically an original character using the name and a vague approximation of the color scheme. Though she is loosely tied to Carol Danvers, kind of, and is technically an alternate universe version of Captain Marvel from an alternate universe, or maybe even the same one from that universe in Multiverse. Who knows at this point? So that stops her from being as low on this list as she probably deserves to be. Speaking of deserves to be low on the list, at number 10 we have Ekko. In the comics, Ekko is a deaf Native American woman with an association with the Kingpin. And that is where the similarities end. The comic version is a hero who can mimic any action she sees another take, similar to Taskmaster, who would also be on this list if we were ranking villains. In the show, however, for some reason, she is not a hero, but a ruthless criminal with the ability to channel her ancestors' abilities or something like that, and for some reason, she only has one leg. Her look, personality, powers, and alignment is completely changed to something totally different, and they thought that they could base a whole show on this original character? Very, very strange. But we're only at 10, so let's keep going down. At 9, we have Mr. Immortal. Mr. Immortal appeared in She-Hulk as an older, wealthy, immortal gentleman with legal problems from the many exes he's faked his death to get away from across the decades. In the comics, however, he's an aspiring young superhero and leader of the Great Lakes Avengers, a team of similarly strange and unrespected heroes attempting to run their own Avengers team out of the Great Lakes area of the United States, similar to how the West Coast Avengers were led by Hawkeye, but with no association with the Avengers and filled with completely D-list heroes. His immortality is a lot more powerful in the comics, and not just a simple healing factor. Of all characters on this list who are poorly adapted, I find Mr. Immortal to be the most disappointing. Because a Great Lakes Avengers comedy superhero movie about a bunch of losers trying to be more than they are and then having to come together to save the world with nobody even knowing they did it would have been pretty awesome, and a breath of fresh air in the MCU. Alright, let's move down to number 8 with Doc Samson. So you may or may not remember, but Leonard Samson was the psychiatrist with Betty Ross in The Incredible Hulk. Now in the comics, he is a psychiatrist, and he does have feelings for Betty, but he is also a gamma-powered badass with long green hair akin to his biblical namesake. When I saw the movie, I thought the actor was a weird choice to play a big buff green guy in a red shirt later on, but it turned out I had too much faith in those kind of things back then, since the character has never shown up since and likely never will. Maybe someday they'll have a recasted Doc Samson burst into the movies with all his glory, and I'll be proven wrong, but I kinda doubt it. At 7, we have Jennifer Kale from Agatha All Along. About the only similarities between these two characters is that they use magic. They look and act nothing similar to each other. In the comics, she is far more powerful and is a heroic character not specifically associated with just witchcraft. In the comics, she's an ally of Man-Thing and is the cousin to Johnny Blaze. I assume they could do those things if they wanted, but I really don't see the point. It's not like she's a particularly popular character even in that show, and I'll be surprised if she ever appears again. Moving down to 6, we are at Starhawk, which gives us both Stakar and Alerta Augord of the Ravagers in Guardians of the Galaxy. Sure, this is kind of a cheat having two of them, but I didn't want to waste 2 spots with what is essentially the same description. Adopted siblings who are fused into the being that would become known as the Starhawk and became part of the original Guardians of the Galaxy in the 31st century. Eventually they were separated and Alerta became a hero of her own for a time. In the movies, they are both captains of the Ravagers like Yandu. Besides some yellow crap on his back, they literally share nothing in common with their comic counterparts. To be honest, I could have filled half of this list with the original Guardians of the Galaxy, but between these two and Yandu, I think you get the point. Though Krugar looked in it pretty cool, and he did use magic, so he would have been rated higher. And now we're in the bottom 5 worst adapted characters in the MCU. So far, the last 2 characters have been so dissimilar from their comic origins that they're just not even remotely the same characters. What's left is a section of characters so dissimilar from their comic counterparts that they may as well have not been based on any comic character at all, since they're just making stuff up. At 5, we have Mar-Vell from Captain Marvel. In the comics, Mar-Vell is a huge character. Without going into too much detail, Mar-Vell, also known as Captain Marvel, was a Kree sent to spy on humanity under the guise of Walter Lawson, who eventually sided with humanity against the Kree Empire and became an incredibly powerful superhero and later tragically died of cancer. In the movies, Mar-Vell is not a superhero, but an old female scientist who already defected from the Kree and is hiding on Earth under the guise of Wendy Lawson. About the only similarities they have is they're Kree, they're blonde, and they know Carol Danvers. Not only is this a completely different character with completely different motivations, but we lost an awesome and huge part of Marvel lore that I think would have been a huge benefit to the history and world building of the MCU. And why? Well, they let us know. It's because they didn't want a dude involved with Carol Danvers getting her powers or superhero name. Alright, wow. Big pat on the back, guys. What heroes. I'm sure I've got a whole video's worth of content commenting on this choice someday, but for now, let's move on. At 4, we move down to Scarlet Scarab from Moon Knight. Scarlet Scarab in the comics was a male, retconned-in World War II era hero given mystical powers from an artifact. The MCU version is literally a completely original female character with a different name who teams up with Moon Knight after gaining powers by becoming the avatar of Tarit. Her father has a kind of similar name to the comics, but not really, and they're both archaeologists like the comic version. This character is a completely original character created by the MCU. She gets her powers from a hippo, not a scarab, and most surprisingly of all, her costume is in fact not even scarlet. It's just gold and white. Unless I'm mistaken, I don't think they even said her name in the show. They just announced it afterwards. So I guess they could call her Gold Hippo going forward, and then I guess I would just have to take her off the list completely. The only similarities she has to the comic counterpart are the name, the Egyptian theme, and her wings, kinda? They added this character into the comics after she was created in the MCU, but like I said before, that does not count for this kind of list. Now, the fact that a straight-up original character is not lower on this list is a testament to how little the characters below her have to do with the characters they're, quote, based on. So, starting the bottom three, we have Ursa Major from Black Widow, a man in the prison that Red Guardian is being held at that only has a couple lines. In the comics, however, he is a mutant who is able to transform into a huge bear creature. Why they would use this character and not have him just be a bear guy who is in the prison is far beyond me. If Red Guardian was introduced arm wrestling a bear, that would have been quite a memorable scene. Instead, we just have some guy in a Russian prison. The literal only reason he is not at the bottom of this list is the fact that nothing in that movie says he can't turn into a bear. So there. And number two, we have Jossa. Now in the comics, Jossa is the robot bride of Ultron with her brain patterns based off of Janet Van Dyne. She rebelled against Ultron and became an ally to the Avengers. So what was she in the MCU? I don't remember no robot chick. Well, she's just a name written on one of the AIs Tony Stark reaches for to replace Jarvis with when he becomes Vision. He does not grab her and grabs Friday instead. Now, I know this is nothing but an Easter egg that is very unlikely to go anywhere, but this is technically the official Jossa in the MCU. Though it would be interesting to adapt her in this way, since Ultron was based on Jarvis in the MCU, to have a female version also be based off one of Tony's AIs would be interesting. The only similarity she has is that she's an AI, assumedly, and she is technically tied to Ultron since Tony created both of them in the MCU. And that's it. So, who's the number one worst adapted MCU superhero? Who ranks lower than some random guy in a prison and a literal Easter egg? Well, at number one we have Silk. Now, I didn't know until recently that some of the other students at Peter Parker's school in Spider-Man Homecoming were using the names of comic characters associated with Spider-Man while both looking and acting absolutely nothing like them. Cindy Moon is one of those students. I watched that movie and I could not have told you she was in there until I read about it much later. In comics, she was another person revealed to have been bit by the same radioactive spider that bit Peter. She was taken and trained by Ezekiel, who would be at the bottom of this list as well if Sony characters were included, and spent years locked up in a bunker for her own safety before being freed by Spider-Man when he learned of her existence. Now, she doesn't appear to be going through any of that. She appears to be a perfectly well-adjusted student with no powers at all. Just a regular girl. So it seems they decided to just grab the name for God knows what reason and make her some random kid. And she's not the only one they did this with. She's actually sharing this space in a three-way tie with both Black Tiger and Bluebird, two other students at Peter's school in the movies. Black Tiger is Abe Brown, who is a martial artist and a member of the Sons of the Tiger, and is the older brother of Hobie Brown, who's also known as the Prowler. Hobie has yet to appear in the MCU as far as I'm aware, though the ultimate version of the Prowler has appeared. I almost wonder if they meant to use the name Hobie, though, since the character is an actual ally to Spider-Man, but they made a mistake somewhere in the process. Bluebird is Sally Averill, who uses gadgets to fight crime and try to meet Spider-Man. Now, unlike the other two, she actually was a classmate of Peter Parker in the comics. So, she should be higher on this list, but her, build suggests that she doesn't share the same gymnastic skills as her comic version. And there you have it. Those are the 20 most poorly adapted superheroes into the MCU. What did you think of this list? Does it suggest anything about how characters should be adapted? Does it matter if they try to make them like the comics? How many of the characters on this list do you like and remember, and how many of them were duds that really just could have cut out of the movie and you wouldn't have even noticed? Is there any purpose to throwing comic names on completely original characters? Does it help tie them into the universe a little bit, or does it just upset anyone who would even know what that name is and no one else would care? If you enjoyed this video, should I do similar lists for the villains? For other Marvel universes like Sony or Fox? Or should I do ones for DC universes? Anything else you'd want to see, let me know and I'll consider it if there's interest. Or did you absolutely hate this video? If so, I appreciate you staying till the end. Let me know below to never do anything like this ever again and to just keep it to commentary from now on. And lastly, I didn't BS this list. I actually ranked every single Marvel superhero who's been adapted into the MCU to see who the bottom 20 would actually be. But that video would be hours long, so I haven't invested the time into making that yet, unless people would want to see that kind of thing from me. Make sure to hit that like, subscribe, yada 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 button, leave some comments, all that crap, and I'll see you soon as I can.